Jayapal, it's her time. She's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is such an important hearing on the consequences of failing to protect a backbone of our democracy, our free and independent press. In Seattle, we're very fortunate, even though that we've lost many of our newspapers. We do have one of the few remaining family-owned newspapers in the country, and they've taken the leadership in the creation of a new national initiative called Save the Free Press. But even for a larger newspaper like the Seattle Times, the struggle to compete against big tech is serious, from the loss of ad revenue, the forced provisions that tech platforms impose on them, and the co-opting of locally produced news content with little to no compensation by big tech news aggregators. Mr. Smith, you've departed from some of your tech leader colleagues in not only saying that government must play a role in regulating big tech, but then actually holding to that. In fact, I remember during our hearing with the 4 CEOs last year, several of them said that they welcomed government regulation. But let's talk about what just happened in Australia when the government passed a law to require big tech platforms to negotiate with and compensate news platforms for the content they produce. Google decided to play hardball and shut down its operations in Australia. They argued that Australia's news media bargaining code would undermine the open internet. Microsoft, however, supported Australia's news media bargaining code. Can you tell me why and quickly what happened when you voiced your support?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, one of the reasons I suppose I'm here is because we got drawn into the same issue in Australia, and we weren't really part of it until Google told the nation of Australia that if its legislators passed a law that is not entirely dissimilar from this one, it would boycott the entire country. And we looked at the law and we read it and we thought, well, it seems pretty reasonable to us. And so Satya Nadella, our CEO, and I called the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, and we said, look, if Google wants to leave Australia, we'll stay and we'll increase our investment and we'll abide by the law. We'll share revenue with journalists. We're happy to run a search business at a lower margin than Google. And we think that there's some room for all of us to succeed together. And within 24 hours of my going on Australian television to endorse the law, Google called up and said they would reverse course and stay instead. And, you know, look, to be honest, I think that is a challenge we have to look at head on. When companies start threatening countries and saying that if their legislators pass laws they don't like, they'll pull up and leave, then something seems a little out of whack. And I think, you know, trying to restore what has always been the case, which is namely that no one should be above the law, no person, no government, no company, no technology. I think that, you know, that's in part where this started. I think that's in part where this needs to go. And along the way, let's please ensure that journalism can do what it needs to serve all of us.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Shavern, Google argued that the Australia News Media Bargaining Code imposes essentially what's been referred to by some as a link tax. What do you think about that argument?
It was just wrong. There's no link tax in the legislation, and particularly all their rhetoric around breaking the internet was just flat wrong. The fact of the matter is, what it really asked for was a fair deal between news publishers and Google across the whole range of Google products. And really the test is now in terms of how Google is going to address the mass of small publishers in Australia and really use the code. And we're looking forward to seeing that outcome. But no, it wasn't a link tax, and we have nothing here about a link tax at all.
Thank you. Mr. Schlois, in your testimony, you emphasized that mergers between major media companies have eroded news beats across the country, and the power of big tech mirrors a broader crisis of consolidation across news industries and indeed our entire economy. In addition to scrutinizing these mergers, what are other solutions that this committee should consider? And are there other funding models that we should actively be promoting as well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the major things, right, is making sure that whatever we do is tying into actual jobs in local journalism, because we've seen that whether companies are just going to be making a bunch of money by pushing profit margins as high as possible, or if they get a blank check from the platforms, we don't necessarily have any accountability or transparency to make sure that they go to jobs. I think more regulation to try to limit hedge funds in this space would be really key, because as folks have said before, One of the ways that we can save the solution and solve it is by providing more competition in the market, by providing more and more local news jobs. I also think that like finding ways to support nonprofit and sustainable organizations is a way about that as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for those important comments. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. I now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.